So Regenified allows every farmer to start down the regenerative path. If you apply for Regenified verification, you've made a commitment and you have to supply a plant. Now, we're not going to allow you to claim your product as certified Regenified. You have to meet certain tiers, and then you have to move forward. Because my goal, I'm not so concerned about the 2% or whatever it is that are certified organic. I'm concerned about the other 98%, because that's the food that's going into our school systems. It's being fed in our hospitals, it's feeding our military, et cetera, et cetera. We need to make a major difference and change all of agriculture. That's the real reason we founded Regenified, is how do we move everybody together?
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the planet and want to create a better future together. Before we dive in, I have an update for you. Through our partnership with forestplanet.org, we've already planted, and let me get the current number, 28,395 trees so far this year. Every new subscriber to this show, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and on our newsletter at caremorebebetter.com, we're planting a tree for you. So that could be up to 4 trees per individual if you care to go and follow us on each of those platforms. Now, today, I'm super honored to be welcomed by one true pioneer in the soil health movement, Gabe Brown. Gabe, along with his wife, Shelley, transformed Brown's Ranch in North Dakota into a global model for regenerative agriculture, eliminating synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, integrating cover crops, livestock, and perennials, and restoring biodiversity across 6,000 acres. He's the best-selling author of Dirt to Soil, which I've just been listening to on Audible. He is a partner at Understanding Ag and co-founder of the Soil Health Academy. Gabe has been featured in documentary films advocating for soil health and regenerative farming, including Kiss the Ground and Common Ground. Today, he serves as a board member and public face of Regenified, a new third-party regenerative certification standard. He's received countless awards, from the Heinz Award for the Environment to the Environmental Stewardship Award for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I hope you'll all join me in welcoming Gabe Brown to the show. It's so nice to have you here.
Well, thank you, Corinna. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I feel like we're rounding out some of our exposure from individuals who've been featured in or responsible for the films Kiss the Ground and Common Ground. You're wearing that cap today. So before we dive in, I'd love to hear about your experience becoming a soil savior or even a hero in a red cape like that's depicted on the movie poster for Common Ground.
And they did that without my permission, I may add, because that's not me. I'm simply a rancher who saw the difference that regenerative agriculture made to our own family's ranch, and I wanted to share that message worldwide.
Well, and the book that you wrote that is now really, it's almost like a Bible in that industry, was written in, I think it was published in 2018. So you've been at this for a while and really are a would-be pioneer in the space. What have you found to be the biggest impact of your work so far? How are you getting that message out there, and what's really working?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. I just want to say it's not me alone. It's literally thousands of others who are also in this movement. And I've been going down this path a long time, since the mid-1990s, and was when we started transitioning our own farm. But as I met other people and they came to my ranch, I went to theirs, started speaking at conferences, and my network grew. And the more people I met, the more I learned. And I tell people that one of the exciting things about regenerative agriculture to me is I learn something new every day. And the more I know I don't know. And that makes it exciting. You know, we can be a lifelong learner. But as I became more known and started speaking to more diverse audiences and literally all over the world, as your circle grows, you realize that regenerative agriculture really is a conduit and can be used as a conduit. I like to call it common ground for common good. So today I spend the vast majority of my time either in front of a laptop like this, talking to CEOs, board of directors, or directly in their boardrooms, explaining to them about regenerative agriculture. And the first thing I do is try and find, where does their interest lie? Is their interest in climate change? Is it in clean water, clean air? Is it in mental health of those farmers and ranchers out there? Is it in revitalizing rural communities? Is it in farm profitability, or is it in nutrient density of food? Wherever their interest lies, regenerative agriculture is at least part and can be part of the solution. So I firmly believe that as a society, we can agree on 85+% of the issues. We all want clean air, clean water, nutrient dense food. Why don't we come together and, coalesce around those issues rather than spend our time arguing about the 10 or 15% of the things we don't agree on? Because I just think that's just wasted time. So I really like to call it common ground for common good.
Yeah, well, it makes so much sense to me, especially as the regenerative movement, as you've stated, has continued to grow. When we had Josh Tickle on this podcast, the filmmaker behind Kiss the Ground and Common Ground, he talked a lot about the impacts that we're making on farmers and the fact that we really need to be focused on ensuring more profits can potentially stay in their hands, because you're really talking about 8 cents on the dollar for the food that we buy. That's what a farmer's getting. And so many of them are just scraping by. We don't think necessarily about the costs of the inputs that they're having to buy. A single plot of land could be using millions of dollars in chemicals every year, and that impacts them. So, I was hoping that you could talk about your perspective when it comes to getting more farmers and more ranchers to come on board this really regenerative process, this regenerative way of doing things, whether or not they still use some pesticides or are considering making a bigger shift.
Yeah, certainly. And, my journey was, I was farming, quote unquote, conventionally, using those type of inputs. And then the years 1995 through 1998, we had 3 years of hail and a year of drought. And I found myself $1.5 million in debt, and the bank wasn't going to borrow me money anymore, loan me money anymore, so I could purchase those expensive inputs. But during that time period of those years of hail and drought, I started to notice a change. All of a sudden, earthworms were showing up in the soil. Well, I had gone no-till. I wasn't tilling the soil anymore. I had stopped using those harmful caustic fertilizers and pesticides because I couldn't borrow money, as I said, to purchase them. I noticed more songbirds showing up. I noticed that our pastures were becoming more productive. Our cropland was just healthier because of it. And so after those periods of hail and drought, I really realized that, hey, I didn't need those inputs. Why don't I just keep farming without them? And it sent me down this path of learning how soils and ecosystems really function. So very quickly after that, despite the fact that 1.5 million was a lot of money, we were able to dig out of that debt literally within 15 years and be debt free. And our son now, who has the ranch, he's 37 years old. He doesn't borrow money anymore. He operates strictly on cash. And he does that because he's highly profitable. So in 2018, my wife and I turned the ranch over to him, and I started, along with a couple other individuals, a company called Understanding Ag, which is really an education company. Because what I found out in my journey was that farmers cannot implement what they do not know. And I have a couple of college degrees in agriculture. Nowhere in my educational process did somebody teach me how soils function. Did they teach me about the natural nutrient cycle, biology being fed by root exudates of plants? And so you learn these things, you're able to produce food at a much lower price point. And with Understanding Ag, we're now consulting on over 36 million acres across North America and England, Ireland, and moving into Europe. And it shows you the interest. What we're able to do is significantly increase farm profit while producing food at a lower price point and providing food that's higher in nutrient density, which brought about one of my other companies I'm involved with, Regenerative. And Regenerative is a verification certification company that verifies the good work farmers are doing in producing food. And it empowers the farmers to tell their story and to go sell that product to the consumer. It also gives consumers the confidence that, hey, we're purchasing food from a farmer that is truly producing nutrient dense food and moving down the regenerative path.
Well, I love the history and the story that's deeply rooted and embedded there. You know, there is, I think it's kind of a bilateral movement happening within the foods industry. You have those that believe that regenerative practices need to include organic, fair trade, things along these lines, like with the regenerative organic certification. And then your own, which doesn't necessarily require that a farmer end up 100% organic I think there are 9 stages, if I have that correct? 5. Okay. So you go over the course of I think a decade or something to that effect. And farmers are using less inputs with time. They're not tilling. They're moving in this direction where they are, building things in a more life-producing capacity. So there's more life in the soil. There's more carbon underground. They have less erosion. They have better water retention in the soil. Everything's moving in a more positive direction. And some have been critical of the fact that you have not integrated an organic requirement at the very end. I have dug into that a bit, but I'd love to just understand your perspective and offer you the opportunity to give a counterpoint and help people understand why organic may not always be the solution.
Yep. And first, I want to be perfectly clear about this. Our own farm could be certified ROC, regenerative organic, if we so chose. Okay, because we do not use those inputs. Okay, so we could easily be certified that if we so chose. My counterpoint to that is, okay, organic is good, but it may or may not be regenerative. Regenerative organic certification is good, but it may or may not be producing truly nutrient dense food. What we need to use as the benchmark is, are we fully advancing the 4 ecosystem processes, the energy cycle, the water cycle, the mineral cycle, and biodiversity? Regenerative ensures that we are. Now, all regenerative farmers, okay, can take it to organic or beyond if they so choose. Okay, and if they choose to be organic certified, that's fine. They can still do that. But we're going to require them to continually improve, which is something organic certification does not do. You can be organic by default just by not applying those things, but that doesn't mean you're regenerative, and that doesn't mean you're continually improving. Regenerative has annual verification, which means the auditors are out there every year, and then you only have 3 years, and you have to keep improving. Now, one of the things we're really focused on is, what's the nutrient density of the food that's being produced? And so we work with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, Utah State University, who uses a mass spectrometer where he can identify over 2,500 different phytonutrient compounds in food. So your phenols, your alkaloids, your terpenes, these are the compounds that really drive our gut microbiome and drive human health. Okay, I honestly believe that that should be used as one of the benchmarks for any of us producing food. Are we truly producing nutrient dense food? And we also have to realize, getting back to your original question okay, organic is good. I purchase organic, if I can't find certified regenerative food, but it, organic has been around for years, right? Yet what percentage of farmers are practicing organically? Okay. In the US, it's less than 2%, okay? And give or take a little bit. We can't afford for that to remain. We need to focus on the other 98%. So Regenerative allows every farmer to start down the regenerative path. If you apply for Regenerative verification, you've made a commitment and you have to supply a plant. Now, we're not going to allow you to claim your product as certified Regenerative. You have to meet certain tiers, and then you have to move forward. Because my goal, I'm not so concerned about the 2% or whatever it is that are certified organic. I'm concerned about the other 98%, because that's the food that's going into our school systems. It's being fed in our hospitals. It's feeding our military, et cetera, et cetera. We need to make a major difference and change all of agriculture. That's the real reason we founded Regenerative, is how do we move everybody together?
And to that point too, I understand that some regenerative organic certified products still incorporate some plowing in their work, which can degrade some topsoil. Is that not correct as well?
That is, but that's not saying that they have to eliminate all tillage. There's some very good organic farmers out there that do incorporate an occasional tillage pass. By that, I mean maybe once every 3 to 5 years. Okay, we have to allow that because that's their context. We want them to continue. But I have a neighbor that farms organically, and they till at least 5 or 6 times a year each field. Right now, today here in North Dakota, we have 50 plus mile an hour winds. The amount of topsoil that's being eroded away after that tillage pass is just astronomical. The thickness of a sheet of paper is the equivalent to 1 ton of topsoil per acre. Think about that. I'm watching a windstorm now where there's literally hundreds of tons of topsoil being moved off these fields that have been tilled. We just can't have that for the sake of our children and grandchildren.
And we all saw the ravages of that during the Dust Bowl era when plowing was what was used. People removed trees. They didn't have windbreaks anymore. And now, even farms that are not regenerative understand that they need to have things like slopes and breaks in the wind, and otherwise they will lose so much topsoil that their job becomes insurmountable. They just can't do it.
That's correct. And they need to plant cover crops and capture that solar energy and feed soil biology to drive the natural nutrient cycle. Look, I don't want any of my conversations to be about pitting one facet of agriculture against another. No, it's common ground for common good. We all need to work together, and we all need to learn from each other. The organic sector can learn from the regenerative sector, and the regenerative sector can certainly learn from the organic sector.
I was having an interesting conversation recently with some individuals who work at the Lands Institute and are working on a project specifically with Kernza, this super long-grained, long-rooted grain. It's a perennial grain. You don't plow it, right? And just getting to this conversation about organic, because I was looking for, are there Kernza products out on the market that are also certified organic? And they brought up to me the fact that, well, you can't really plow Kernza because of the fact that it is such a long-rooted, multi-year crop. We therefore need something to be able to support weed abatement. And so going fully organic is something that is truly more challenging with this particular crop. This just brings into the story the fact that it could even be something that is just unrealistic for certain crops, and that the abatements that we need to employ may be very strategic and limited in some cases to in order to produce something that can be truly regenerative, keep our topsoil healthy, and move in a more positive direction.
Well, Kernza, it'd be very easy for Kernza to be organic because there's no reason to till it. It's a perennial. And the Bread Lab out in Washington State has worked with several varieties of wheat that are perennials. So that is another way that you can incorporate perennials into organic systems. Anytime we get a perennial, it's better than an annual from the standpoint you don't have that type of disturbance.
And then they can have more minerals in the food, to your point about nutrient density in these foods as well, right? You get more minerals because the roots go deeper.
Oh, yes, without a doubt.
Now, you often speak about the 5 principles of soil health, and I think you've touched on them a little bit through our conversation. Which principle do you feel farmers struggle with the most, and how do you get over that struggle?
Yeah, and it's actually 6 principles now. My book is outdated. We added the principle of context, and I'm not so certain that context isn't the most important, because context is farming and ranching within your environment. And, we all have different contexts. We have different environmental contexts. We have different family contexts, different social contexts, different financial contexts. We have to take those into account. The other principles, just briefly, are least amount of disturbance possible. By that, we mean chemical disturbance. We mean mechanical disturbance, least amount possible. We need armor on the soil. That's the third principle. We need diversity. Nature abhors a monoculture. Where in nature do you find monocultures? They only exist where mankind has either put them or mankind's action has caused them to occur. The fifth principle is living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. We need living plants capturing that solar energy, moving carbon and other nutrients out of the atmosphere down to feed soil biology. And the sixth principle is that of animal and insect integration. Ecosystems do not function properly without animals and insects, yet too often today we see the cow villainized. Well, I throw this back and ask the question to those who vilify a cow. Okay, historians will tell us there was more grazing herbivores on the North American continent pre-European settlement than there is now. If methane and these other, chemicals or gases are a problem now, why weren't they a problem back then? Okay, it's not the cow, it's the how. In fact, if you really want to advance soil health and take massive amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, we need more grazing animals, not fewer. So those are the 6 principles of soil health. Is there one that's more important than another? No. They all are intertwined holistically, and you can't just apply, pick and choose, or you're not going to have a healthy ecosystem.
Now, I have deep roots also in vegan communities, and there are some that argue that you don't need animals on the land. I personally struggle with that concept because, the excrement feeds the ground. There's no way to farm without using animals. You're buying the fertilizer or soil with integrated chicken poop or something is in there, right? It's got to have that organic matter.
Well, and it's not just that. We need to understand how soils function, how the energy cycle works. So growing plants photosynthesize. They collect solar energy, convert it into all these other compounds. They use part of it for growth, and part of it is exuded into the soil to attract biology, and there's this synergistic effect. The biology running its life cycle supplies nutrients then to the plant, and the biology consumes nutrients that plant is exuding into the soil. But what happens when a plant is grazed, That plant then starts sloughing off more root exudates to attract more biology to regrow. If we remove, and this is well documented by science, if you remove animals from the landscape, you will desertify the landscape. It will go backwards. You have to have grazing animals. For one thing, for what I just described, the other thing is what you just described. Animals trample standing material onto the soil surface, where biology then, saprophytic fungi, etc., can cycle that through. Also, that material that's on the soil surface protects that soil from wind erosion, water erosion. Otherwise, it's just going to remain standing like in a desert situation, and it'll oxidize away, compounding our problems in the atmosphere. And then, of course, as you described, the dung and urine add fertility. So it's totally false. Now, if a person wants to be a vegan, that's fine. That's their choice. But you cannot deny the importance of animals in the ecosystem. You don't have to eat them, but they need to be there.
Yeah, 100%. Now, many people, I think, don't realize that farming in a regenerative way actually lowers input costs while improving yields over time. And we've touched on that a bit, but I wondered if you could share an example from your ranch or from clients you've worked with through Understanding Ag and with Regenerative that have really been able to move the needle and show success for those that might be skeptical.
Yep. So right now, corn prices are, believe it or not, about the same price they were in the early 1970s. 50 years, we still have the same corn price per bushel, okay, of corn. Yet, what have input costs done? What have land prices, fertilizers, chemicals, fuel, all that done? They've continued to increase exponentially. So much so that right now in the Corn Belt, which is the I states, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, etc., it's costing anywhere between $4.50 to about $5.50 to produce a bushel of corn. That's all costs considering land costs, equipment costs, input costs, fuel, fertilizer, etc. On our own farm in North Dakota here, we're producing a bushel of corn for $1.44 a bushel, all costs in. Okay, do we have the same yield as the I states? No, but what I care about is profit. Okay, it's costing them $5, we'll round it off, to produce a bushel of corn that's selling for $3.50. They're losing $1.50. I'm spending $1.44 selling it for $3.50. I'm making over $2 a bushel. Who's going to be the last one standing? Then, to go along with your point, we often hear people say, well, regenerative agriculture cannot feed the world. Okay? I use the example of corn. I produce corn, my neighbor produces corn. They use a lot of inputs. They may yield slightly higher than me, okay, for a corn yield. They may, okay. They're producing it at a loss, so they're losing money. But just go on a yield. Who's going to feed the world? They yield a little more, but that's the only thing they produce, right? Well, I grow my corn crop, then I grow a cover crop. I graze that cover crop with my grass-finished beef, my grass-finished lamb, my pastured hogs, my laying hens. We produce honey. The bees are thriving on there. Who's producing more food per acre? It's not even close. And then I ask you, who's producing it profitably? Not even close. But then I ask you, who's producing the food that's higher in nutrient density? Not even close. That's us. And then I'll ask you, who's doing it in a way that enhances the environment and biodiversity? Not even close, right? So to me, it's not a matter of, can regenerative agriculture feed the world? It's a matter of, regenerative agriculture is the only way to continue feeding the world and give the next generations an opportunity to be sustainable.
The farm you just described, it really reminds me of, I think, what Americans still think about as farms of the yesteryear. When I was growing up in the 70s, there were community farms in my neighborhood that were run a lot like this. But there has been an industrialization of our food supply with food subsidies for corn and soy. In fact, that's much of what's produced in those areas. The only reason that corn growers and soy growers can stay profitable is through subsidies because they are producing it at a loss. So, how do we get government to come along with this movement more quickly? I imagine that's something that you're working on.
Well, it is often get called upon by government officials for my opinion and to testify, etc. But I really believe the way we're going to drive change, government is pretty dysfunctional. Let's be honest about it. The political winds change, Washington changes, legislation changes. That's why I spend the majority of my time today educating. Okay. And I believe we need to educate everyone. The farmers cannot implement what they do not know. We need to educate the farmers. But we need to educate the consumers. Every consumer can make a difference with their buying dollar. Okay? Go to your local farmers markets. Okay? Get to know your farmer. Purchase from those you feel comfortable with. Okay? Also, then, what else? If you don't go to a farmer's market, go to your store. Go ahead, purchase that organic food, purchase Regenerative certified food. Okay, what does that do? That signals brands and industries that, hey, there's consumer demand for this product. Regenerative had a third party do a consumer survey just this year. That consumer survey showed that in the early, like 2020 to 2022, and I may be off a percent or two here, but there was like 11% of consumers knew what regenerative was. The years 2023, 2024, that grew to 23% of consumers. Last year, it grew to 46% of consumers understood somewhat what regenerative was and tried seeking out those products. So what has that done? Just this morning, I was on calls with, and understand, I'm not allowed to voice who I'm talking to at this point in time because we have non-disclosure agreements with them. But one of the largest retailers in the world, okay, who are really looking at the regenerative movement. How do they source regeneratively grown and raised products? So now we got the farmer, we got the brand, we got the consumers demanding it. Now we drive change without legislation, okay? So to me, it's about educating the entire supply chain. And these brands are extremely interested. If you name the top 10 food producers in the world, I'll guarantee you that I've talked to 9 of them just this year.
Well, that's amazing. Now, I'd like to talk about transition so that we can support that next generation. You mentioned that you've now handed operational leadership of Brown's Ranch to your son and daughter-in-law. How does it feel to see this next generation take the reins?
Yeah, and understand, I'm fortunate in that our son Paul, ever since he was young, Paul's never tilled a field. He's never used a fungicide or a pesticide. He doesn't know what that's like. The only thing he knows is regenerative agriculture. So I want to tell you a little story because I think it shows you just where we're at. So when our son was growing up in high school, they had FFA, Future Farmers of America. He was very active in it. There was approximately 50 students in his class that were active in FFA. Most of them were from farms or ranches. Today, he is the only one out of those 50 that's actively farming. Now, how sad is that? And I don't blame the kids. I blame the parents because they didn't make it conducive. And you look, you talked about your upbringing and how it was all corn and soy, and they're losing money now. Why would those children want to come back to the farm? The parents have to make it conducive. Regenerative agriculture allows that to happen. Now, the transition for my son has been relatively easy, even though when he got married, my wife and I decided, okay, it's time they have the main farmhouse. Moving off the farm was not easy for me. I'm not kidding you. But in saying that, it was time, and it's okay. It's part of life. For a lot of people, though, it's very, very difficult to transition the farm to the next generation. At Understanding Ag, we often get called upon to help with that transition. That's why when we form the protocols for Regenified, one of the things that we require is a transition plan. And that doesn't necessarily mean to your own son or daughter, okay? We often told we have two children, a son and a daughter. Our son wanted to farm, our daughter no. Okay, so it was pretty easy for us. But we told them if neither one of them wanted to farm, that's okay. But we're going to ensure the transition to a young person who does want to. It's up to this generation to at least help the next generation. I'm not talking about giving it to them, but give them the opportunity. Because that opportunity, what's happening in agriculture today, these farms are becoming very fragmented. The parents pass away, the children who moved off the farm, they each inherit a part, and then this parcel gets sold, that parcel gets sold. Pretty soon you just have a lot of small parcels, and it's very difficult to operate a farm or ranch like that.
Or they end up consolidated by somebody like Cargill or...
or some larger landowner. That's right. Yeah.
Just speaking to this for a moment, I really get the sense that with Regenified and with Rock and some of these other beyond organic style certifications that are out there focusing on permaculture and different ways of growing that integrate different plants together, not monocropping, not tilling so much, even eliminating tilling, and really reducing or eliminating pesticides, fungicides, herbicides to ensure that you have healthy soil, your runoff isn't bad. I mean, all the positive things that come along with this. I really kind of wonder how you see Regenified fitting in. Is it something that also becomes a consumer marker, or is it more focused on the rancher specifically and the brands than on that consumer facing? Like where do you see that time divided insofar as that education?
Yeah, we want to empower realize Regenified's goal is how do we change large landscapes at large scale. So yes, every farm or ranch that comes to us, we will talk to them about how do they move down the regenerative path. But make no mistake about it, how do we do that quickly, influence large landscapes while benefiting the farmer or rancher? We need to work with the brands. And right now, Regenified is working with the major brands and how do we help them source Regenified certified products. So what we're doing, we're working with the brands. In many cases, these brands are helping to pay for that certification and telling their farmers, hey, we want this certification. Why? Because it's good for the consumers. The consumers are demanding it. It's good for the environment, helps mitigate climate change, meets our ESG concerns, et cetera, et cetera. So we're working with brands. The brands then help the farmers. The farmers are getting empowered and they're getting the benefit of producing these regenerative foods at a lower price point. The consumers are being rewarded because they're able to buy the product. Win, win, win.
Yeah. In my experience, it tends to be mostly the brands that do that consumer education because they're putting the badge on their product. They're explaining what it means, not only to the retailer, but also to the consumer. And so it helps to amplify that message.
Yeah. And we have to realize too, they're getting something out of it.
Yes.
We have proven that farms that use these regenerative practices are much more resilient. Okay. they don't suffer from the weather extremes like conventional farms, ranches do. So the brands are getting a consistent supply of high quality product. Plus, they're getting the stories to tell. And nothing is better for those brands than to tell the stories of the individual farms where that food is grown or raised.
Now, as far as challenges in the future that we're all kind of facing, I wondered if you could talk about how Regenified fits next to perhaps USDA and large agribusiness companies that are increasingly talking about soil carbonate, regenerative agriculture, small climate smart communities, and making them kind of expand. Do you see USDA involvement as something that could be an opportunity as we define what regenerative even means? I'm thinking about, as an example, organic. Like they started to regulate the term organic, and wondering at what point they might get involved with something like regenerative.
So the CEO of Regenerative is Salar Shimarani, who is a young visionary who builds businesses and brands. And Salar had the foresight when we founded Regenerative, hired him as the CEO. He went to USDA and he hired a past USDA employee who worked with certification and verifications. Regenerative is the only regenerative approved USDA FSIS label out there. So Salar had the foresight to go there first, get the approval, and so that more or less circumvented USDA wanting to control the narrative. Because Regenerative is already approved by USDA, Regenerative is more or less determining the narrative behind that. It was absolutely brilliant on his part to do that, quite frankly.
I did see some news, I think, from earlier this year or last year, that there was a certain marketing connection between USDA team and Regenerative. I didn't fully understand it, so perhaps this is also connected to that.
Yes, that is connected. It's the FSIS, Food Safety and Inspection Service approval. Yep.
Great. So this means then that I've just seen this happen a few times with FDA getting involved with companies and saying you can't say organic anywhere on the packaging unless it's certified organic. You also, the word natural has essentially been regulated as well. They don't want companies saying natural, like even in the company name, if they can't really thoroughly back up that the brand is natural. And I think that's important too, because we want the words to still carry strength. And if they get co-opted by brands that are using a lot of synthetics or pesticides and things like this, then, you know, the term itself becomes diluted and almost worthless. The certifications that would back them might also kind of suffer the same route. So I think it's really important to put stakes in the ground to say this is what regenerative means. But I'm also seeing different companies define that term differently. So not that there's necessarily a lot of infighting, but if, for instance, regenerative organic certification has to also mean fair trade, has to also mean that you have fair practices, humane practices with your animals, and then I wondered personally, what is the reason to be for fair trade certification? What is the reason to be for certified humane? What is the reason to be for some of these other certifications? And also, are we going to be introducing more confusion on the part of those consumers who need to be given a little bit of bandwidth to catch up and understand what these terms mean and what's relevant? Well, also then thinking about the brands not wanting to over-badgify their product. You know, you see something, I have a product here. This is Earth First Organic. It's a supplement that I picked up at a trade show. And they have on this regenerative, we support regenerative farms. Awesome, right? USDA organic, and then organic is non-GMO and more is something that they educate right on the front. Some brands will have also the non-GMO project butterfly, and they might have Regenerative or rock certification. And so you have all of these kind of badges right on the front of a product. And consumers even get a little tired of seeing all of that. So I wonder if some of the consumer research that you've done has helped reveal anything helpful for marketers that might be thinking through this same story.
Yes, that's a great question, and I couldn't agree with you more. And understand for years, okay, we market off Brown's Ranch. Our son now markets all of our products directly to consumers. We did that without any type of certification verification because we didn't want that. We really believe the choice should be by the consumer getting to know who produces that food. Now, we understand that's not always possible. Why we started Regenified is we were seeing a lot of greenwashing. What people were calling regenerative, look, I'm not playing God. I'm not saying that I know exactly what it is, but I know it has to go back to the 4 ecosystem processes because they take place on all landscapes all over the world. And it all comes back to those 4 processes. So when we built Regenified, we built it on that. What is that farmer doing to enhance those 4 ecosystem processes? I really believe that's the start. And then from there, you can build. Okay. So our certification is simply built on that. The 4 ecosystem processes. We are by far the most thorough verification process in the world. We collect over 100 different data points, way more than any other verification out there, just proving what is being done on that particular farm to enhance those 4 ecosystem processes. You can add on top of that if you want, and we're having internal discussions at Regenified. What should we add on top of that? For right now, that's what we're doing. I'm not going to sit here and bash any of the other verification certifications. I don't do that. I think it's consumer choice, and it's up for the consumer to decide. But no doubt about it, there is going to be some confusion. And I really believe that in a short amount of time, you will see just a few of the certification verifications rise, those that consumers feel the most confident in. So we'll let that play out and see what happens.
Yeah, for certain. I'm also doing consumer research right now as part of my PhD program, specifically asking questions about what consumers really understand when it comes to some of the messaging that they're faced with. And really, what I see again and again is this realization kind of coming to the surface in almost every conversation, no matter how deeply steeped in, let's say, the organic, natural world a consumer might be. They tend to have this common sense perspective, which, common ground, common sense, like kind of all come together, that we need to use plain language that reaches them where they are to help them understand what a given product is or does. And simply relying on a certification badge doesn't necessarily get them there. So, I think of fair trade as being a leading certification that's not likely to go anywhere. Certified humane being a leading certification that's not likely to go anywhere. Some of these that kind of stand out, non-GMO project and organic, and all, like, as really being the kind of top echelon in consumer awareness, that they've seen it enough to understand it and trust it. And so as we get into speaking about regenerative and making this more of a prominent discussion on products, I think at least for a while, even if regenerative does end up meaning more than the 4 ecosystems pieces that you advocate for, that we will have to, at least for a bridging time, ensure that they understand all of these things come together. Because still to this day, people need clarification on the fact that USDA organic means a product is also non-GMO.
Yeah, does it though? There was just a report released last week that showed that the USDA organic, there was coming out of Mexico, which was approved then to come into the US, that there was toxic chemicals in it. That was just released a week ago.
I would love to see the research that you're referring to. If you can send that to me, I will read it and I'll include it in show notes as well for people that are curious. But non-GMO project verified, this, I'm really speaking to that need, because if something's organic certified, it already has to not be non-GMO, because you can't have an organic certified product that is genetically modified, at least under our present certification systems. Whether it's toxic, I think that's a second question. You're saying that there was GMO in there as well?
I will guarantee you that there is. I see it happen lots. Yeah, because of variances that are allowed.
Well, corn cross-pollination is hard to avoid too, right?
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But that's a whole another topic.
It is another topic one that could lead us into a rabbit hole or two, right? Mm-hmm. Now, something you've said before, and I think even touched on this earlier in our conversation today, is that we need more life on Earth. This is a perspective that Paul Hawken also really I think that's his mantra. Like, we need to bring more life onto Earth. That's his latest book, Carbon, which we've discussed on this show as well. What does this story mean to you today? We need more life on Earth.
So what I saw in my own transition, the transition of our farm, I talked about after those 4 years of drought and hail, when I stopped the tillage, I stopped using the pesticides and fungicides, we saw a return of life, primarily insects, both in the soil and above the soil. What followed that was bird species, because a lot of bird species feed on insects. What also, with stopping of using some of these herbicides, we had more forbs showing up on the farm. What do forbs produce? Seeds. And what eats seed? Granivores. Those are insects that eat seeds. And then more birds show up, more wildlife shows up. Just here last month, we had a gentleman come who is able to identify over 500 different bird species just by the sound. And he documented 105 species of birds on our farm. Okay. And think about that. I travel a lot all over the world, and I've been spending a lot of time lately in the UK and Ireland. And one of the things that was very noticeable to me was the lack of insect diversity. And to me, that is kind of a benchmark, because from there, you're going to have lack of bird species, lack of wildlife. You'll have less plants, because if there was more plant diversity, there would be more species of birds, insects, etc. That's one of the things we're documenting at Regenerative, is what's the diversity of plants, animals, insects on a particular farm. We need to do this. There was a study that was released a couple of years ago that showed in Germany, they literally have lost 75% of their insect population. We just can't have that, because it's going to lead to lower and lower nutrient density of foods and lower biodiversity of all life forms on Earth, So to me, when I think of biodiversity, I mean everything. The soil microbiome. Think of this for a moment. There's more microorganisms in a teaspoon full of healthy soil than there are people on this planet. Think about that. That's just hard to even fathom. Yet how many of us as humans understand that the diversity of that soil microbiome directly affects these phytonutrient compounds that feed our gut microbiome? We need to understand this thing is all connected, it's holistic, and we all need to come together, common ground for common good, in order to not only help ourselves, our children, grandchildren, and the future of this planet.
Yeah. Now, I want to direct people to read your book. Do you perhaps have another edition coming out that talks about this sixth element?
So I'm currently working on 2 more books at the moment, but I've been working on them a while, and I get a bit of time crunch, and I'm hoping they'll come out, but I really need to step back from some of my other obligations so I can finish them. No set date yet, but thanks for asking.
Well, when they do come out, I'd love to have you come back on and we can talk about the specifics of those works. Now, I will send, of course, our audience to the websites for both Regenerative and for Understanding Ag. Is there anywhere else that you would like to send them specifically so people can expand on their learning journey as it relates to what you're doing in the regenerative agriculture space?
You know what, I would rather, thank you for asking that, but I'd rather direct them to their local farmers markets and get to know their farmers. You know, we need to, I think COVID showed us that we need to source our food locally, get to know who's producing your food. And then I tell everyone, make a difference. By that, I mean, make a difference in the food that you consume and you feed your family. But then I encourage you to make a difference in your local community. Go, what's being fed in our schools? Okay. Can't we source that food locally, helping the local economy, helping the local farmers? I would much rather see people focus their time on doing what they can to make things better in their own lives and in their communities.
Well, here. I shop at my local farmers market every Saturday. It operates from May through November, so half the year at least, the one that's local for me. And it's been a joy to meet the stone fruit producers and, getting my flowers even from local growers that are growing it in their backyards and other spots as well. So it's just been really quite an experience overall. I will say too, many of the regenerative agricultural farms that are running do education days where they'll invite people onto their farms to be able to explore, learn, plant, harvest, even partake in part of it, and even design mini courses that are designed for kids and school children to come with field trips. My own kids this spring, part of their 5th grade year, they're going to a science camp that is held on a regenerative farm. And they're there for something like 3 days, which I'm super thrilled with. Again, these are things that parents advocate for, and then you have to do some fundraising around, but eventually it can really move your local communities in a very positive direction. Your impacts can be stronger. Your connection points, that human relationship, which I think also speaking to your COVID years, I mean, we lacked so much of those touch points, and it creates a healthier community, a healthier you. Your kids get involved. They start to understand where their food comes from, which I think is so vital, absolutely vital.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your work. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you and everything you do.
Well, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure.
As always, you can find with our show notes the resources that we mentioned today. I will include understandingag.com, Regenerative.com, and also the earlier episodes where we touched on this episode, including interviews with Josh Tickle, Kelly Ryerson, John Rulak, and many others who connect to the space of regenerative agriculture. This will help deepen your understanding of where your food comes from and the sort of world that we're working to build together. Now, as a reminder, every time you subscribe to our newsletter or that you subscribe on the platforms that we're out there on, we're planting trees. So I'll encourage you to do that as well. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Together, we're making a big difference. We're reforesting our world and regenerating the soil beneath our feet. Until next time, remember, we can care more, we can be better, and we can regenerate life. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.